Okay, it looks like we have about 40 people have joined up so far, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Michael Hammond. I am the principal of OCD Tech. We're the IT Audit and Security Group here at O'Connor and Drew. We have some of the just meeting tips. We've muted the lines for everyone for now, and we will open them back up towards the end of the presentation. But in the meantime, if there is something that you wanted to jot down, a question you wanted to possibly send in, go ahead and feel free to email info@ocd.com, and one of our people will be able to post it over to me, and we'll be able to respond appropriately. So let's go ahead and get started. See if we can get these slides to move. Okay, so what we're talking about today is really the cybersecurity and the landscape that's out there right now, what we see happening to our existing clients. We can't avoid what's happening in the headlines. We're seeing that security hacks are happening nearly every day. We have a little slide later on talking about a cybersecurity breach that happened later on in the year, earlier in this year, and unfortunately, we knew that that wasn't going to be the last, and just overnight, last night, another variant of that same type of malware is spreading around the world, with this one being much worse. And we'll go over some of those details. The purpose really for this presentation, though, is to talk about how it's hitting closer to home. We see big headlines, Target, Home Depot, and all of those sound well and good, but how does it really relate to our own businesses, and more specifically locally within the New England region, or the types of businesses for the people that are on this call. So again, we want to talk about what's happening, where all of this is coming from, how easy it is for hackers, unfortunately, to get into our networks and get the data out, and then really want to go through some real life examples from our own practice of data breaches and ransomware attacks to really kind of hit it home for everyone. And then finally, what can actually be done to help mitigate or minimize the risks to this, to what's happening to us. So one of the things that we say is that if you don't know where your data is, you don't know how to protect it. And you don't know what tools you need to have in place to protect it. No one has enough money to protect everything at 100% all the time. It's just not feasible. There is no silver bullet. There's no shiny blinking box that you can buy that will help you to figure out where is everything and how to protect it appropriately. So one of the first steps you actually need to do is figure out where your key data is so that you can put the appropriate protections in place. So, we think that the data is only on the servers. We think it might be on laptops. We might not always have personal sensitive information on the laptops, but maybe your IT group, your IT company has logged onto those laptops, and now their passwords with highly privileged administrative rights are on those laptops. You might have it on mobile devices, mobile phones, iPads, tablets. Or you might be looking to or already put much of your data up in the cloud. And we use the buzzword cloud, but it's really just someone else's servers. So while that data is up in the cloud, it's still your responsibility to make sure that it's secure and appropriate protections are in place. And while you may not have the direct capability to do it, you can't log on to a particular server and make sure permissions are correct, you still do have a responsibility to make sure that your vendor, your third party, is performing those controls adequately for you. And we'll talk about some of the ways that you can do that. We're looking at more and more data breaches each year. We previously did a seminar similar to this back in 2015, and we showed how the number of data breaches continued to rise, and it was somewhat steady. Unfortunately, in 2016, the number just shot through the roof, where we had 300,000 to 600,000 up to 800,000 in 2015. We're looking in billions of records now in 2016 being breached. And some of this really is because organizations are feeling it's more appropriate to notify the correct regulatory authorities or attorney general's offices when they do become breached, that they're feeling it's easier to put the trust in the system that just by notifying them, it's not going to be the end of the world. We've done presentations with the Attorney General's office, and they would rather you notify them than not, even if it means nothing may happen to your organization. They have so many breach notifications, specifically talking about the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. They get thousands of breach notifications a year, and in that they don't have enough resources either to investigate every one of them. So they're typically looking at the ones that involve underserviced or disenfranchised victims are the breaches that they're really going to go after, or if it's part of much, much larger. If it's a smaller organization that has a smaller number of people and it's only a few records that were breached, they may not do anything other than to send you a notice that they received your notice of the breach. But they don't want people feeling that no matter what you do when you call them, that automatically you're going to get fines. They may look at things if you have a written information security plan and if you violated that, and we'll talk in more details about what that means, but they don't want to discourage people from actually notifying, because it's through this combination of notification for more and more people that hopefully the next person can learn from the first on what the breach was. So some of the other statistics that come out through these breach notifications, the FBI just released their 2016 numbers, and including this 4.2 billion number of breaches that had occurred, they were looking at significant numbers of fines by victims. And so they were talking about something called business email compromise. And this is where you might get tricked into clicking on a link and being instructed to send or wire money to a particular organization, or the CFO gets an email to the CEO and vice versa that says, please wire X amount of dollars. And in 2016 alone, that number was over 360 million across the United States. Ransomware, malware, that number was only about 12 million, but that number is looking to creep up, and we'll talk more about ransomware specifically later. One of the things that we do specifically, so the FBI talks about the national level. One of the things that we do specifically here at O'Connor and Drew and the OCD Tech group is we're out there on the internet scraping different websites for public data, something that we call open source intelligence. And we're looking for our clients' records. So what we end up doing is, much like you hear from LifeLock or one of those Experian type facilities where they're scouring the internet for your personal information, we're doing that same thing for our clients as well. And in doing that, we grab millions and millions worth of records and compile that information to find what is on there and what is out there in that environment. So, it doesn't look like it's a big deal until it's your data or your customer's data. So what we're seeing here is these are actual email addresses and passwords that have been breached and exposed out onto public websites like Pastebin, where the information is actually published and stored so that hackers who compromise the network and then look to profit from it can go ahead and publish this information. Sometimes it's just samples of the information, to validate that it's real credit card information, real email addresses, real passwords. Then after a while, once the information becomes stale enough, they'll publish the entire list. And we go through and scrape and look for that information so that we know when, say, one of our particular clients' data. One of the key things in recovering from a breach is obviously knowing that it's happened, and the ability to be notified sooner or identify your information being published out onto the internet. The faster that can happen, the faster you know and you can take steps to remediate it. Other information that might be out there is when companies or malicious attackers might try to register domain names to lure your employees or your clients out onto other websites, malicious websites that aren't yours. And they'll do that by registering domain names. So some of the other information that we'll look for is variants of the domain name. So if we're OCD.com, we might look to see if someone registers the name OCD.net or OCD.us. And we'll look to see if that information, number one, who registered it, and then two, what they might actually be using it for. Often people are asking us, where is this information? What does the dark web look like? Where is this information sold and bought and being bartered on the internet? So this here is a screenshot from an actual darknet website that was auctioning off the entire database from a recent Experian hack. So in this screenshot, it's a little hard to see on here, but there's actually information on there about the vendor. And on these sites, the vendors will get rated, much like they do on eBay or on an Amazon web store, where they'll get the number of times that this product might have been purchased from this vendor. They'll get ratings on how accurate it was, if the information was sent timely, if the information, the interaction with the individual person, just like you do on eBay or some of these other sites. So on this site here, they're actually auctioning off for about $750 the entire list, so 30 gig worth of Experian data. And this information here is especially bad because not only does it contain person names and social security numbers and addresses, but Experian also collects buying habits. So they might know if who you live with, that you have a dog, that you like to shop at Neiman Marcus, that you have 3 credit cards, high-end credit cards, maybe you've got an American Express Platinum card. All of this type of information is captured in what is in this Experian database. So this one is particularly a little more expensive at the $750 range. Normally these types of databases will be much smaller in nature dollar-wise, but this database having so much information is one of the reasons why it's more expensive. The other thing that people are looking at is obviously it's getting easier and easier for these hackers to get in, and one of the ways that they're getting in is obviously through open source intelligence tools like we mentioned before. So everyone knows about Google and how we use that to look up Word documents and PowerPoint presentations. But there's also other search engines out there that hackers use similar to Google. This one here is a website called Shodan. And the original intent of this website was for indexing everything that's not searchable or really ignored by Google. So this web engine automatically looks for things like traffic cameras, webcams in your house or your business, types of devices like the firewalls or the routers. So it's looking for everything that's open on your network that is not a Word document or a PowerPoint document. This is really the index for the Google for hackers, the index of everything that's the Internet of Things. One of the things that makes this database particularly troublesome is that it also includes what we call the header information or banner messages from the individual devices. And in this search query right here that we did, we typed just the word default password. So if the device that we're looking for, whether it's a webcam or a router or firewall, has a default password, and that default password was returned in the string, we know that in this screen, for example, we have 47,000 devices around the world that we could start attacking because they have a default password. When one of these other malware or ransomware attacks happened, there was ways to put into tools like this, like Shodan, that we were able to actually find which devices immediately did we know that were vulnerable. And specifically with the WannaCry virus ransomware, they knew overnight about 200,000 devices and networks that were going to be exploited the next day as that worm went through the internet. So this one is specific. You can use in this search query, you can do things like show me just Braintree, Massachusetts. And now we could get a list of all the devices in Braintree that are vulnerable. We could look at specific types of devices. We could search for devices, just firewalls in a particular zip code, and all of this is indexable right here on Shodan. The other thing that's particularly bad about this site is for $25 you can get access to the back end of the database and run your own queries and your own searches offline and be able to use that to attack other systems, actually automating the ability to do your attacks. And this is one of the reasons why it's getting easier and easier for these hackers to get in, because someone's already doing the hard work, the upfront work, the actual reconnaissance work. Some of those things take much longer. Someone's already indexing it for us. This next site here is called Wiggle, and Wiggle is a Wi-Fi ward driving site. So every one of these, and we took a map snapshot of just the United States, every one of these little purple dots, and as they get scrunched together based on the number, we get more yellow. Every one of these is actual Wi-Fi access points that someone with a laptop and a GPS or a cell phone drove by and found your individual Wi-Fi access point. And at this scale, it doesn't look bad. You would expect that people would have this much Wi-Fi out there, and that it's broadcasting, so it's easy to find. But then when you start to zoom in, and although this looks a little hard to see, what you're actually looking at here is a street level view of the actual names and addresses for all of the individual Wi-Fi access points. So if your home router is called Xfinity Wi-Fi, and someone were to drive by, we would now have in this database that your access point Xfinity Wi-Fi is located at your specific address. Where this hurts a little more on the business side is sometimes businesses will, in order to help their clients in their lobbies or in waiting rooms, might name the wireless access point something based on the business. So when we go in to test and perform our tests of different environments, we'll look at this database first. We don't even have to drive by your office anymore. We can come to this database and see if someone else has already done the hard work for us. We can see if this says OCD-guest or OCD-public, and see not only if that Wi-Fi exists, we can actually even see the make and model of the type of router or the type of wireless access point it is, look up and see if there's been vulnerabilities already identified for it, and at the same time we know the type of encryption that you're using on it. We'll know if it's not encrypted at all, we'll know if it's using older encryption called WEP, and we'll know if it's using the newer encryption WPA or WPA2. We'll get all of this reconnaissance done before we even leave our office. One of the key things we want to do in this webinar really is to give you some real-life examples from our own practice. So these are examples from the other side of the house, the accounting or the audit side, clients that had actually not engaged us on the IT audit side to talk through what are some good best practices that they should have in place. And so in this first one, this wire transfer that was executed, unfortunately, what ended up happening was this firm was using or still using Microsoft's Office 365 in the cloud, but what they hadn't done was turned on the two-factor authentication for the email. So while it was a small number of employees, one of the employees had a very weak password, and unfortunately that employee was the one that was administering, because they didn't have a full-on IT group. That was the employee that was administering all of the emails. And what the hackers ended up doing was, once they compromised the password of one person, they had the password of everyone. And they set up rules to automatically move key emails into the trash folder. So while people were going into their email as they normally would, the hackers went in and actually created an email from the CEO to the CFO asking them to wire $80,000 out of the account. The CFO, never seen the email because it went directly into the trash bin, never knew that this email came in. The attackers then replied back to the CEO saying approved, we'll send this out, and then sent the email to the bank initiating the wire. When the bank called the firm to find out if it was a legitimate, when the bank emailed the firm to find out if it was a legitimate wire, the CFO never seeing the email because it automatically went into the trash bin. They then replied to the bank saying, yes, please initiate the wire as well. Unfortunately, because it was always in the trash bin, the CFO never saw any of this happening. It wasn't until they looked into their accounts that they noticed $80,000 was gone. Being a business account, they were not able to recover all of the money. They were able to recover about $40,000 of it, only because $40,000 of the money went to another United States financial institution, and that bank was able to recover the money. But $40,000 of it had already left the United States, and they were not able to recover it. The second one, a CFO was tricked into sending $75,000. This is another instance of where someone was tricked via email. They didn't hack the account. This is something that they call the business email compromise, where an email had come in, spoofed email had come in. Unfortunately, the CFO believed it had come from the owner of the company, and they sent out $75,000 via wire. Unfortunately, what made this one even worse was that it was actually a closed business at the time. They had just sold it and had released the insurance because the business was closing, but they had not actually gotten the money out of their business checking account yet. And in this case, the problem was they had no insurance anymore for the business, and being a business checking account, they really had no standing with the financial institution to recover any of the money. The third instance here, and just to reiterate, these are all local instances that happen somewhere to a business in the New England area. So when we talk about, these could happen to anyone until it happens to you, these are actual instances of people that we know, actual companies. The payroll account was completely emptied. In this case, what ended up happening was the CFO was tricked into clicking on a link on an email, and we know that email then installed a keystroke logger on their computer. The attackers waited until they found the CFO logging on to their financial institution with their user ID and password. They then emptied the payroll account. Unfortunately, the company was not made aware of it until one of the employees, looking at their checking account, normally they could see that the night before the money is about to come in, their paycheck is about to come in, called the CFO and asked, how come I'm not being paid? The CFO, not knowing, not understanding what happened, looked into it, called the bank, and the bank looked into all of the accounts and found that the money was actually transferred out and sent overseas. So what we had told them at this point was something like two-factor authentication or some positive callback to the CFO could have prevented, it would not have prevented the keystroke logging. You need different controls for that, but in this case, something like two-factor authentication on the website, on the bank's website, or some type of positive pay system from the banking, where you might get a text message during big transfers like that, could have prevented the account being emptied. Other examples, so if those were all types of wire transfer, account money being moved, the next grouping are things really around misconfigurations of the systems themselves. So in the first one, we worked with a company where their IT group, in their plans to upgrade their line of business Office application, incorrectly opened up a firewall rule to try to get the application to work. And when that happened, they opened up the firewall rule, went home for the night, and when they came back the next day, they found that their entire network had been held ransom. They had ransomware that encrypted their entire file server, and when it encrypted the entire file server, they lost all their data. They believed that they actually weren't sure what type of backups they had. They thought that they might have something like Dropbox. Unfortunately, the way that they had the Dropbox configured, it was doing automatic backups and synchronizing the files, but once the files were encrypted, it unfortunately sent the encrypted version up to the cloud as well. So they no longer had a local copy that was good anymore. They also had a encrypted copy in the cloud. Now, the good thing for this company was that the type of ransomware that they fell victim to was already breached, was already cracked. So we were able to recover all of their files for them. At the same time, though, we've been tracking the Bitcoin that was being used as part of the ransom, and found that had they paid the ransom as other people did, that money went overseas, first to Germany, and then from Germany over to the Ukraine. So it looks like this money actually, if they had paid the ransom, was going over. And we'll talk a little bit later on about whether or not paying the ransom is a good idea or not. In doing audits, IT security assessments for clients, we often find wireless networks exposing customers' data, including personally sensitive information. We will find that, as I said before, companies wanting to provide the best experience for their customers will end up putting a guest wireless network, or sometimes even a weak production wireless network. And when they do that, unfortunately, sometimes they incorrectly believe that just because it either has two different names that they're segmented, or that they're using a different IP address that they're segmented. And we'll find that those wireless networks are actually combined. And when we try to connect to the guest wireless network, we're able to find that we're able to get to the production side where your office applications are and your customers' information. And one time, while sitting in a parking lot across the street, we were able to connect to the client that we were working for, and in there we were able to find on their photocopiers that they were storing, unknowingly were storing the driver's license, credit applications, and other types of personal sensitive information that was actually being stored on the photocopiers. And we were able to actually pull back 6 months worth of data that was being exposed to the internet. Exposed via their wireless connection. We've also had the last two on here. Another CPA firm was handling too much information, was keeping too much of the data of their clients. So early on, we talked about really truly understanding what data you have and why you need it. If there's data that you're holding that you don't need anymore, rather than spending money on trying to protect it, just get rid of it. And in this case, this CPA firm had W-2s for their clients' employees that they never needed. So while they needed the W-2s for the owners of the company, they didn't need the W-2s for all the employees as well. And when that firm was hacked, unfortunately, all of those W-2s were exposed. And then lastly, company backup is exposed to the internet. So when I talked earlier on about that website, Shodan, that shows the types of Internet of Things data that's exposed, there are different types of services online that use for the backups. And while those backups don't contain Word docs and PDFs and Excel spreadsheets that are easy to find via Google, they do keep track of the types of services that are used to back up information. And we have one of our clients where that information was actually being exposed to the internet so that anybody could search for it. And rather than take out just a few documents, they were able to take out the entire backup of the client. So then I guess more timely, there's this WannaCry ransomware that's going around. And so it's not just a cute name given by an attacker. WannaCry got a lot of press for how quickly it spread. Unfortunately, though, it was not very effective. So while it did use tools and techniques that were identified during the breach from the NSA in order to find and then find the victim, find the vulnerable computers, and then actually go in and compromise them by encrypting them. One of the problems was that it was actually easily defeated by registering a domain name that actually pretty much stopped the first iteration of the WannaCry. So it was a very good method for infecting and crippling these computers. It was just done very poorly. So it wasn't an effective way. It didn't get a lot of traction. And they only had created about $92,000, $93,000 worth of ransom. Unfortunately, though, this new variant that's coming out came out last night and is already making its way from Europe to the United States. This new one, based on the same type of methods that WannaCry was using, this one's called Petya or not Petya, or we've also seen it being called by the name GoldenEye. It's similar in that it's using the NSA tools, the vulnerability from what's called Eternal Blue. But unfortunately, the way this new one's working is the kill switch. There wasn't a publicly available kill switch. There is a file that you can put in on your computers that will stop it from encrypting, but it doesn't stop it from spreading. And one of the biggest problems with the way this new one is spreading now is, in order to pay the ransom, you have to send the confirmation to an email address to get them to send you the decryption key. But the company that owns the email for this individual or this group of individuals actually took down that email address. So now, if you do get infected and for some reason you needed to or wanted to pay the ransom, there's actually no way to contact the attackers and contact those attackers to actually get the decryption key. So in addition to wanting to make sure that your business is secure and saving your data, your company's revenue, your employees' jobs, all of that's well and good, but there are other reasons for wanting to make sure that this data is protected. So many states, 46 states and a few of the territories, have PII, personally identifiable information laws. And each state, while each one of these laws is relevant to their own constituents, it's actually determined by the person's state of residency. So it's not where the business is located, it's actually where the individual is. So if you have employees in Massachusetts or customers in Massachusetts, you have to comply with the Massachusetts law. But if you also have customers in 20 other states, you have to comply with their laws as well. So that can be very difficult to keep track of and making sure that you're compliant. One of the best things that you could do really is to look at the Massachusetts or the California law for data privacy and breach notifications. Massachusetts and California have the most strict laws on the books in order to make sure that you're protecting, while your customers or employees are trusting you to protect their data, your duty is to make sure that it is protected. So these two states have the most strict laws that need to be in place in order to make sure this happens. So if you are looking for, if you're in another state and you're looking to find a good best practice, where to look for to make sure you comply with your state, if you look at Massachusetts or California, you're probably going to be pretty good there. Each one of these laws, some of the states have only certain components of it. But again, in Massachusetts, what they look for is really, as I said before, identification of the PII data that's in your organization and how you're protecting it throughout its life cycle. So as it's being created, whether it's being created within your company, a customer, an employee comes into your office and gives you a photocopy of their driver's license, fills out a credit application, an employee gives you their driver's license or their passport in order to fill out the I-9. That information, as you know you're getting it, you're obtaining it or creating it, how you use it, who you share it with, how long you keep it, and then ultimately what you do with it when you're done. As I said before, the best type of information that you have is no information at all. So if you don't need that social security number anymore, and you don't need that driver's license anymore, the photocopy of the driver's license, get rid of it. You don't need to protect it if you don't have it. Most of the states do require some type of encryption for data in motion. So if it's a social security, an Excel spreadsheet with employee social security numbers or customer social security numbers, customer credit card numbers. The minute that data leaves your organization, it's really considered in motion. So if it's in an email on your iPhone, or if it's on an Excel spreadsheet in your laptop, or it's in your backups, and those backups are going off site to one of your records retention vendors, really the minute it's leaving your four walls, they kind of consider that this is data in motion and needs to be protected appropriately. The definition of a breach varies widely from state to state. Some states, it's really truly only a breach when you've been notified that someone who was not authorized to handle that data now has it. So if someone breaks into your network, takes all of your data, sends it overseas, sure, that's a breach. If a laptop is stolen from a car in your parking lot, and granted, I'm not an attorney, so you need to get your own legal counsel on the true definition of a breach, their legal interpretation of a breach. But if a laptop is stolen, if a laptop goes missing from a car in your parking lot, that may or may not be considered a breach. Doesn't necessarily, if you know that it was stolen, that's one thing, but if it's just that the laptop went missing, you're not sure if it was stolen or if you just misplaced it somewhere within your four walls, it might not actually be a breach. So one of the first things that you need to do when this happens is talk to your attorneys and then possibly the insurance company before, as quickly as you're reaching out to your local law enforcement, the FBI or the Attorney General's office. And when you're talking to the Attorney General's office, they'll want to make sure that have you already talked to your local police? Have you already engaged legal counsel, someone to do the forensic work? They'll want to make sure that you've done that up front before they're going to publish your name in the trade journal that says that your organization lost all this data. So some of these data breach laws and state laws have specific information around timeliness for breach notifications. Some states will say that it must be timely, and timely can vary depending on if it's a small breach, a limited number of people, you might be able to notify those individuals quicker than if it's a much larger breach, active investigation, truly identifying the scope of and the breadth of the breach. You may get more time. So some states do not have a specific timeline. We'll talk about that it will be timely and more relevant. Other states have a very specific timeline. There is proposals in the European Union. So if any of you have customers where you're collecting data, personally sensitive data from people that live in the European Union, their breach notification proposal is 72 hours. It would be very difficult on a 3-day weekend to analyze all that information, get it all ready, and actually present to the public and those people in 72 hours about a breach. So lastly, one of the more important things is really that you've designated an officer to be in charge of making sure all of this is happening. And so that's got to be someone in a relevant position, and many of the laws say that it must be someone with enough authority to have a say in what they're doing here, to make sure that they are looking at the type of information and the appropriate controls that are in place. Lastly, on the state laws, we wanted to give you an example of two similar companies, both with unencrypted backup tapes, to give you an example of what's required here. The first company, having no written information security plan in place, thought that they could handle it themselves when a backup tape went missing. Unfortunately, they took months and months to work on the case, and the key from the Attorney General's office was that they had no written information security plan in place, and one backup tape resulted in a $650,000 fine. The second company had a written information security plan in place. They lost a similar unencrypted backup tape, although in this instance they followed their written information security plan, did what they were supposed to do as far as did what they said they would do as far in the plan, notified the Attorney General's office, and they ended up with a $7,500 fine. Two similar situations, but two very vastly different outcomes. As we get towards the end here, we want to give you kind of a cybercrime snapshot. So one of the larger organizations that can truly identify what's going on in the cybercrime space is Verizon. And not saying the other organizations aren't good, but Verizon is in a good position where a lot of people that have FiOS in their homes or their companies have Verizon, or they're using Verizon for MPLS networks, the types of networks in place. Verizon can actually see what's going on those networks, and they're often called in as part of their data breach incident response teams to actually identify what's happened. So every year, Verizon publishes a report of what they're seeing across a number of different clients, different verticals, different industries. And in their the 2017 report, what they're finding in their analysis is that 75% of the breaches are still being perpetrated by outsiders. And while a lot of people often say most breaches happen, it's malicious insiders, Verizon actually would contend that it's mostly from the outside. But that doesn't mean that just because you have a great outside perimeter network that you need to not worry about what's happening inside, when still 1 in 4 is happening from an internal employee. So they're finding that that's happening. So making sure that the perimeter is secure. They're also finding that about 80% of hacking-related breaches are happening with either stolen or weak passwords. And so if an entire database is stolen, there's not much you can do about that. But what you can do is, if one of these organizations gets a hold of a database with usernames and passwords, making sure, and maybe even offering to your employees password management tools that allow them to more easily have different passwords for every site. And while that sounds like a pain, if a company like LinkedIn, when they had their breach and my account's on LinkedIn and I'm using my work email on that site, someone may take that password and then try to log into our own mail server thinking that maybe I'm not smart enough to use separate passwords. So one of the best things to do for stolen passwords is either have separate passwords on every site, or something like turning on two-factor authentication. So while they might have my password, they don't have my cell phone, they don't have the type of token that is needed to mitigate the risk of being able to have two passwords or two similar passwords. Weak passwords, passwords that are easily cracked, or passwords that are easily guessed, the best solution on that one really is, instead of having to tell people you need to create an 8-character password or a 9-character password, is actually requiring really long passphrases. So while someone might say, it might sound bad to say I'm going to have a 12-character password or a 16-character password, your employees they may freak out about having to come up with such a long password. One of the things that you can let them know is, well, instead of thinking of a password, think of a passphrase. A long sentence is much, much harder to guess, even if it doesn't have complex upper numbers, upper letters, lowercase letters, and special characters. Just the length of the password does more than the complexity of it. Almost 70% of malware was installed via email attachments. This is one of the reasons why training your users through periodic and continuous phishing campaigns, testing to make sure that they are not clicking on links that they shouldn't, and understanding and really being able to train them and help them understand what does a malicious email look like, how to be suspicious. Most of the time, everyone knows that there's not a prince somewhere in Africa that's waiting to send you $2 billion. But during the holiday season, people are expecting UPS to send them notifications about a package to be delivered, and helping them understand what makes a good-looking email, what makes an email real versus not. And one of the best ways to do that really is through periodic phishing campaigns and employee security awareness training. And then lastly, breaches are being financially motivated. I mean, this one here kind of, I think, is actually a little low, I would think that more of the breaches are financially motivated. It used to be that people just wanted to see if they could get in. Now, as the market and organized crime gets more involved, where they're able to understand that they can make money doing this, a lot of money, using virtual currencies, so it's much easier for them to be anonymous more often. I think that the financial motivation is going to go up and make it easier for these types of breaches to happen. Because we have a number of specific types of verticals on the phone, we wanted to put in 2 slides, one for our higher education clients that are on the phone. This was a note from Ted Mitchell, the undersecretary at the time, about while the higher education institutions have federal information from the clients, from their students, advising them that it's very important for them to consider cybersecurity protections in place. And while NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, typically is writing documents for federal information, DoD and such, that the higher education group should be looking at NIST Special Publication 800-171, which identifies recommended requirements for ensuring the appropriate long-term security of the information that these institutions hold. So if you're thinking the federal student aid information that you're holding for your students, they're recommending that you look at this guideline in order to make sure that you have the appropriate protections in place. For our auto dealer clients that might be on the phone, we do a lot of on-site assessments for our auto dealer clients, and we've really broken it out into 2 areas of concern when we go out to the clients. One is really what we'll call local attacks, where you need to be physically on site, some type of proximity to the dealership to take advantage of it. And we see it's often, very often, misconfigured wireless access, employee security training. Sometimes there's high turnover, so it's often difficult to make sure that everyone's trained all the time. We hear often that the DMS, the dealer management system, handles that for us. We've heard things like we don't have to do the patches, the DMS handles that for us. This computer can't connect until to the DMS until the patches are in place, and all of that happens. But not every system on your network might connect to the DMS, so not every system on your network might be patched as much as you think it is. And unfortunately, for example, this latest ransomware that's coming out last night and today, it only needs one machine on the network, and as soon as it grabs hold of one machine, it then spreads through the network using regular Windows system administrator tools. So you might be completely patched for this particular Microsoft vulnerability, but unfortunately it's not using that Microsoft vulnerability anymore to spread throughout the network. And then we often see either no or severely outdated written information security program plans. We will ask for the document. It'll be in a drawer somewhere where it was found, where it was created back in 2010, 2009, 2010, when they were first required, and then no one's looked at it since. From a remote attack perspective, we see misconfigured firewalls often. We see that the management interface for the firewalls is exposed to the internet, and sometimes your IT, if you're outsourced IT company or your IT group would like to be able to remotely administer and fix your network when they get called, they might need that type of access. But there are controls in place that can help mitigate the risk of someone like us or other hackers that actually try to brute force their way into that firewall. So we often don't see a lot of content filtering, blocking of inappropriate sites, or blocking of the type of information that should be in place so that to help minimize the risk of someone going to a compromised website. We spoke earlier about the exposed backups, and then just an overall failing to patch computers. So in the last few minutes, we're going to talk about steps we can actually take today. So all of that's the bad news of what's happening. So when we go out and do assessments, one of the first few observations that we often have on the report, we get asked questions about, we've paid for this assessment. Now, how much is it going to cost to fix all the things that we came up with on the list? And typically, the top 1, 2, and 3 items are often either free to fix or very low cost. It might only require a few hours of time from your IT department. Is to make sure default passwords are changed, make sure that you know what types of devices are on your network. And so the Center for Information Security has something called the CIS Top 20 Controls, or Top 20 Critical Controls. And what we've done here is really laid out just the top 5, with numbers 1 and 2 being the same control. So really truly understanding what's on your network, understanding the type of devices that should be on your network, both from a hardware perspective and a software perspective. Should you have file sharing software? Do you allow that type of software? Do you have movie streaming software or not? If that's on the network, or if you find that on the network, there should be controls in place that can easily shut down that from happening. The second is really developing these types of secure configurations for these devices. And that's when I talked about often the number 1, 2, or 3 in every one of our reports is about strong passwords and changing default system passwords. We find default passwords all the time in almost every one of our assessments. And unfortunately, using Google or one of these other tools, it's just way too easy to find out what that default password is for us to be able to then use it. The number 4 item on the CIS Top 20 Critical Controls is around continuous vulnerability assessments and patching. If you aren't continuously scanning your network to find the vulnerable systems and then being able to target patching those vulnerable systems, you put a big disservice to the overall health and security of your environment. And then lastly on here, number 5 is around controlling administrative privileges. Once we have compromised the system, if we can get administrative access to that one box, we then typically can get administrative access to many of the boxes. So if you limit your end user's ability to be admin of their own machine, you severely limit our ability to move laterally across the network. So if we're sending a malicious email as part of a phishing campaign, or if a real malicious email has come into your network, if the person who clicked on that link is an administrator of their own desktop, that malware is going to install and will have full control of the desktop. And if that person is also an administrator of multiple desktops, because of the way that you've controlled administrative privileges, that's going to move across the network much faster. And then because everyone's talking about ransomware lately, we wanted to just have a slide in here about what can be done. Even the FBI in their documents talking about ransomware will say, while it's very hard to do anything about it after the fact, the number 1 way is prevention, and that is only through backing up your data, having multiple backups of it, and having backups that are offline. It does no good to, as I use the example of one of the others where they had Dropbox, and as soon as the server was compromised, it then replicated all the compromised files to Dropbox. It does no good if you don't have offline copies of those backups. Making sure that antivirus and anti-malware software is installed. We've had antivirus software on our computers for years and years, and it always pains us when we have to pay the $39 every year per computer to renew those subscriptions in order to keep those up and running. But once the malware does get on your computer, many of the vendors are pretty good at preventing the spread of it. So renewing the subscriptions for the antivirus and anti-malware, keeping the systems patched. This includes not only the Microsoft patches, but the Adobe and the Java patches. There are problems, I make it sound easy to just patch, but we do know that there are compatibility issues with certain applications that make it so that you might not be able to upgrade the version of Adobe or upgrade the version of Java. And in times like that, you have to look at using other systems, other ways to control. Maybe that computer can't connect to the internet anymore if it has to use an older version of Java, for example. And then limiting the use of administrative rights. Like I said, if the malware can't spread because the ID that it was installed on doesn't have administrative rights, while that one computer might get infected, at least it's not going to spread throughout the rest of the network. We talked about, if it happens, should you pay the ransom? Obviously, it's never recommended to pay the ransom. You don't know if the person or persons that you're sending these Bitcoin, often in Bitcoin, you're sending the Bitcoins to, one, is it a valid address? Because it's anonymous, you don't know where it's going anyways. Are they going to send you a real decryption key? In the case of WannaCry, the volume was so high, they didn't know who was sending in the Bitcoin, so they couldn't actually send the correct decryption keys back. And then there's also you have to realize that when you're sending this money, these Bitcoins, you're really funding other organizations that, as bad as it sounds, they could be using this money for terrorism. And so by paying this ransomware, you are in one way possibly even funding terrorism itself. So one of the best things to do is, if you have been a victim of ransomware, there's two things you can do. One, often many of this ransomware has been decrypted already, and there's freely available tools. If we can send out some links to where those tools are available, and they're getting added to all the time. The people who are programming this ransomware, they may have not realized that there is a back door, there is a way to crack the ransomware itself, and some of it has actually been decrypted already. So there are ways to do it. And then lastly, there's the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. When you do become, or if you do become the victim of a ransomware, they do ask that you respond to or detail the information up on their website. They don't really have a phone number that you can call in, and a readiness team comes right to your office. They can't go online. They can't go on your systems and help you decrypt it. But they do want to know about it so that they can track down and consolidate these reports to find out if it's truly an organized crime environment that can look at it. So lastly, here I'm going to open up the phone lines if anyone has any questions. And thank everyone for their time for joining today. Sure. There has been a lot of talk about the cyber insurance. I think it's going to turn into one of those types of policies that you have to have, but understanding truly what cyber insurance does cover and doesn't. Our team is not in that space where we can analyze people's policies. We do know other firms that do it, but my understanding with the cyber insurance is it covers two things. One is actually getting your systems back up and running, getting you restored and working again. And then the second part of the policy is how much it costs to do, say, breach notifications. Do you have to set up a website or set up a link on your website, set up credit monitoring for all the people that were affected, the stamps and the letters if you had to mail out a physical letter. So there's really two parts to the insurance. I think that's an area that's still evolving. Unfortunately, with the insurance, it's going to cover things like maybe having our firm come in and help identify where the breach happened, how it happened, who it might be exposed to. But it's not going to mitigate all the risk. Where I see it going is kind of like health insurance, where they'll have a questionnaire that you might have to fill out, or an assessment that might have to get done, that if you don't have good controls in place, your premiums might be higher. Just like on healthcare, if you're not going to the gym and you smoke, your premiums might be higher. So I don't think it alleviates everything, but it's probably going to turn into one of those where sometimes, depending on who you're doing business with, might require to see that you have certain levels of cyber insurance in place if you're going to hold their data. Yeah, sure. Yeah, the problem with either whether it's a BYOD and they're bringing their devices to the office, or you're letting them take their laptops and bring them home with them, the minute they leave your office, they might not have at home. They probably don't likely have the same types of firewalls in place and the content filtering and the centralized antivirus software that's making sure that that laptop is as secure as it can be in the office when it goes home. And unfortunately, right now there's very little technology in place to protect that device when it does leave your office. At that point, you have to truly rely on the antivirus being installed and up and running and always up to date, and then any other type of software. These new learning software, something like Carbon Black or Silence, those types of products that can actually help try to monitor what's going on that computer when it leaves your office. Best case, what you would want to do is when it does come back into the office and reconnects to the network, whether that's physically or through some type of VPN, is that you have a way to actually scan that computer before giving it full access back to the network. And if it doesn't meet those requirements, whether the antivirus is out of date or a virus is detected, that laptop or type of device is actually moved into a quarantined network before it's allowed back onto the production network. But some of those are definitely more advanced types of systems that we need to get in place. Yeah. Uh, sure. Yeah. Sure. So Macs can still get viruses just like Windows computers. Anyone who says opposite it's definitely a lie. There is ransomware for Macs. There is viruses for Macs. Most of my team all uses Macs compared to the rest of the office that uses PCs, and everyone on our team still has the same controls in place that we have on the PCs. We all still run antivirus. We all have full disk encryption on our laptops, and we're all making sure that they're patched. Uh, there's really no difference. The only real difference is from the attacker side is it is often harder to make money off of trying to attack Mac computers because most people don't run as the most privileged user on a Mac, which is root. So because they're not the root, they're not the local admin ID. They have to get prompted every time an administrative action is performed. So it's all around harder to compromise a Mac, but it's not impossible. So we still take those same types of precautions, and there are the same type of vendors. Sophos is one that makes a pretty good Mac product for the antivirus and anti-malware, making sure. And then Macs themselves have File Vault, which is the full disk encryption, but it needs to be turned on. It's not out of the box turned on, so that's something that you have to actively look at. So the one, some half of our team is using Sophos. It's Sophos, and there is a management console for that to be able to look at all the devices that are connected, and just like on the PC side. And then the rest of us use a product called Clam AV, Clam X AV, CLAMX AV. And that was widely considered to be the de facto standard for Macs for many, many years. And then, and it was free, which was really good. Now it's gone to a pay-per-use model. And when they did that, it meant if you're going to pay for it, you could pay for Sophos or you could pay for their product. So for us, really, now it's indifferent. Both of them use the same types of antivirus definitions. Yeah, sure. The top three, yeah, sure. The top three that we see is we run Semantic here, although we're looking to potentially switch everyone over to Sophos, and that's really just from a management console perspective, so that we have one console that manages them all. But whether it's the we see a lot of our clients using McAfee, and again, either McAfee or Semantic are really the top two that we see, and it's not always that the engine and the DAT files on the individual desktops are the best. It's really the management console and the ease of use, to be able to look and make sure that your whole environment is covered. Because it does no good. You could have the best antivirus in the world, but if it's not actually running and up to date, it's useless. So, sure. And like we said, we are recording the session so we can make the link available to those who, if you have other employees that were not able to attend.